FalloutEquestria Heroes by No One. Chapter 26. 0 Point. Now I have become Death, the destroyer of worlds.
How long can we sit here huddled in darkness, dying of radiation and starvation for food, before we must rise up? How long can we let the aptly named gangs hoard the food, water and medicine we need to survive? When the balefire erupted over the city, their first thought was to shoo us to the unprotected tunnels, while they hide in their towers, drinking Redaway like water. They do not share their wealth or their food or their medicine, but leave our children to die of sickness and disease. If ever there was a time to rise up and take our city back, it is now!
I had to admit, the speech hid enough emotional aspects that it almost made me sympathize with her. Almost. Not only were there a few inconsistencies, underground was not radiation-proof, but most certainly more radiation-proof than buildings on the surface. I was also suspicious of the rant because I knew the pony speaking. One righteous song of Celestia's vision. Unless there was another white pony with a rising sun as a cutie mark. She was standing on a soapbox in a crowded tunnel while followers gathered to listen to her. Not many stayed, I noticed, and most of the crowd just paused in front of her for a moment before moving on.
We have fed Thiese and these gang leaders with our caps, with our livelihoods, and with our blood. Is this how we should be repaid?
Though I did have a feeling her following would grow as things got worse. Flair and I moved away from the commotion down a smaller tunnel, but it too was crowded. It seemed all of Thiese flooded the tunnels, although Flair said only the top level of tunnels were crowded and everything below was still empty. Once the megaspell had gone off and the streets were awash with radiation, the gangs of Thiese threw out all but the most vital employees and left the rest of the citizens to retreat underground. There were whispers of the riots that took place. How, when some citizens had been denied access to the gang-controlled entrances to the tunnels, the entrance I'd used to get underground was actually secret, so most did not look there, and instead to the entrances held by the various gangs, they had fought back in short but bloody battles. Rumor was that, when fires broke out, Ponytrons came to quell the fighting, but were beaten down and stripped for parts. Of course, the madness hadn't lasted long, as the threat of radiation drove every pony quickly off the streets. Not that the tunnels were the best place to go. I could still hear my pip-bug ticking slowly as I walked the tunnels, proof of the ever-present threat. Overnight, Redaway and Red Axe became worth their weight in gold. Surprisingly, the first thing Flair did after rescuing me was feed me 2 Redaways. Apparently, by the time he arrived for his dramatic rescue, Serenity was already very ill and getting worse. Despite fending off a few scorpions as I was unconscious. But I was doing much better because of my larger body type was more resilient to the radiation. Still, it was a testimony to how badly Redaway was going to be needed in the coming days. At least the journey through the scorpion tunnels to the part where ponies actually lived was mostly uneventful. On his way in, Flair had to fight his way through, and since he'd blown up everything in his path, it left us with a mostly safe, and easily to follow, way out. It was good because my makeshift hind leg was both incredibly painful and very awkward to walk on. Of course, considering the circumstance in which Serenity made the leg, it was basically a work of art. My mind couldn't even really comprehend the work she must have done on my leg to make it even able to be used with the prosthetic. Never mind the fact it was all done while in a hostile area, being irradiated and attacked by scorpions. Once she woke up, I was going to buy her as much candy as I could find. "What's it?" some pony growled when I bumped into them, which broke me out of my contemplative stupor.
Huh?
I wasn't sure who'd said it because the tunnel was a mess of ponies, and when I looked back, the pony was gone. The tunnels may have been made for the entire city, but they were only utilizing 1/100th of the tunnel's actual size.
"Don't bump into ponies."
Flair looked back at me. Not that he had much of a problem running into ponies. Every pony saw his Enclave attire and gave him a wide berth, though this was accompanied with a lot of dirty looks.
I have a new leg. Not my fault.
I lifted up my makeshift hind leg and looked back at it. It wasn't pretty, but it worked enough to walk, if you considered awkwardly limping around walking.
At least you lost it for a noble cause, like a true hero.
Flair said as he turned his head back forward. I groaned at the word and tried to put it out of my mind. The last thing I needed was more overthinking about what it meant to be a hero.
That's only partially sarcasm. Those rat scorpions were a menace. Have been for a year. With so many ponies migrating into the safety of the tunnels, you probably saved a lot of lives by removing the source. I had a friend who tried the same thing a long time ago.
His voice was strange, almost sad, but it was hard to tell through the voice filter.
He never did come back.
Flair stopped to lower his head for a second before suddenly walking again at an increased pace that I could hardly keep up with. That is to say, I couldn't keep up with him at all, especially not with other ponies walking the other direction and blocking him from view. I thought I was able to see him far ahead of me in the crowded corridor until I found myself in a large room that was apparently set up as a miniature market and he was completely gone. With Serenity, normally the filly would be riding on my back, but after the fighting I was too worried about falling and dropping her, so I had let him carry her. Lovely. With a grunt of annoyance and pain, even with medics my body stung, I tried to stand up taller and stretch my neck out to see better. It didn't really work and made me look something like a fool, which I found appropriate. With that attempt a failure, I tried to push my way through the crowd. Hopefully he would notice I was gone and listen for the yells of "Watch where you're going" and find me again. Normally I could navigate the tunnels myself, but it looked different, filled with ponies. As I was looking over at one of the many stands set up, it was actually selling Radaway and was guarded by the 5 fully armored and armed Earth ponies. I noticed something bump into me. At first I thought it was just another pony attracted to my clumsiness, until they said something other than "excuse you" or "watch it."
Excuse me? Are you a Haze?
The words made my heart jump for a second. Because I was a Haze, and apparently Mr. House, my employer, kicked ponies out of his hotel to fend for themselves, as he hogged Radaway for himself. Well, he was a ghoul, so he would have been hogging it for his employees. Though the effect was the same. I managed to turn slightly to the speaker. A diminutive purple mare with a short-cropped yellow mane.
If you are,
she started, looking nervous.
I was wondering, you see, my daughter's really sick and I don't have any Radaway. And I heard the gangs that they had a lot. And if you could spare some...
She gulped and looked at the ground.
Of course she's not a Haze, stupid mare,
an older mare said from the crowd nearby.
No Haze would have that shabby of a leg.
The older mare waved in the direction of my hind leg. With a huff, she vanished into the crowd, her grumpiness apparently spent.
Oh, right.
The purple mare nodded her head in realization.
Yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bother you. Please forgive me.
She gulped nervously and took a step back.
It's just my daughter and I need to go. I'm so sorry for bothering you.
She quickly backed up, running rump first into a confused stallion. This led to more apologizing and running off into the crowd, where she no doubt ran into and apologized at more confused strangers. I watched her leave for a few seconds before she was lost in the sea of ponies. Then let out a sigh. Maybe I could convince Mr. House to use some of his rations to help the ponies down here. Radiation was seeping in and it was only time before ponies started dying. And when that happened, they'd get even more desperate.
Hired?
Flair was beside me so suddenly that I nearly jumped.
You're really easy to find in a crowd, you know that? In battle, you must be the equivalent of shooting the broadside of a barn.
That explained how I kept getting shot. In the face. Of course, if I was a barn, it'd have to be a highly durability barn made by Stable-Tech or something.
Sorry.
I looked over to him to find his rather creepy bug eyes staring at me.
You started walking too fast.
Sorry, I forgot about your peg leg.
He snorted.
Now let's get a move on before some pony recognizes you and starts to wonder if his eye keep red away in their blood.
Ponies would have a harder time recognizing me if he didn't say stuff like that out loud. So I didn't bother answering him and tried to pretend that I didn't know him. Of course, this was might difficult as I was still following him through the throngs of tired and sick ponies. I knew Thiese had a lot of ponies in it, but it was very different seeing them all packed together. Over on the wall of the tunnel we were walking down, I noticed that someone had painted the words, "We are dying" and "We don't have to" in red paint, followed by the word "Unite" in green below it. It was an eerie green, the last word almost sickly. More than anything though, it reminded me of the jade explosions that erupted over the city. I could still see it when I closed my eyes, still feel the shockwave thudding against my chest. The color, I was sure, was no accident. Not that it was the only thing written on the walls. It was simply the brightest and most coherent. It seems the public airing of grievances had been taken to the walls of the tunnels. Perhaps as a way to pass the time, or maybe because they were afraid of saying certain things out loud for fear of who might be listening. Or maybe I was just thinking way too much about graffiti. It wasn't long before we pushed past the thickest concentration of ponies and managed our way to what was apparently the exit. It wasn't the one I was used to, and it was heavily guarded by a trio of battle saddle-wearing ponies. Of course, I still had that flamethrower, so I could have wiped the floor with them if I wanted.
"Stop right there,"
one of the three said.
"What's your business on the surface? I mean, other than the fact you're clearly retarded and want to die."
Claire took a step towards the mayor and used the hoof to point at his black Enclave armor. He replied dryly,
Take a wild guess.
"Fashion parade?"
was the guard mayor's answer.
Enclave. I have business with my commander.
"Oh yes, how could I forget what you tossers look like? Pardon me."
She seemed agitated, to put it lightly.
"Celestia forbid I deny any of you anything. You should be down with one of your laser guns or something."
She looked over at me.
"What's a big bitch for? Target practice?"
Yes.
Flair replied.
"Good enough."
She turned her head to the guard closest to the door.
"Let them through."
She looked back at us.
"Don't blame me if you stay up too long and come back all ghoulified." "What was all that about?"
I asked Flair as we went through the door into the dark corridor beyond. On the other side of the hallway I could see a set of stairs and light peeking through. I tried to ignore the fact my pip-bug seemed to tick faster the closest we got to the door.
"That Enclave laser gun thing,"
I clarified.
Oh, that?
He kept walking, but I saw his head lowered.
Well, I've mentioned that things have been changing rapidly.
Yes, he had mentioned that.
Well, ever since that whole sunshine and rainbows thing, ponies got all excited about the Enclave. Not the Thiese Enclave, but the one that's still in the sky, started something of a civil war.
"I assume this is going somewhere?"
I said as he started up the stairs, my pip-bug clicking faster by the second.
Yes, just listen. So there was a civil war.
Flair explained as he opened the door to reveal a small dirty room with only one exit on the far side.
The Enclave used clouds to grow food, you know, and with only so much saved up and less farmable land, there were food riots, and factions breaking off and other lovely things like that. Apparently the pony who cleared the skies thought it was better that ponies on the ground could see the sun than it was for Pegasi to eat.
"Right."
I wasn't really smart enough to question that logic, but it did seem a little bit strange.
Hi, General Steelwing, the current ruler of the Enclave remnants, the ponies that I work for.
I was a little bit insulted that he felt he needed to remind me of that.
Has been in touch with one of these factions for a while.
Flair walked over to the door on the other side of the room and pushed it open.
Now we're aligned with them and we've acquired, well, see for yourself.
He seemed to be looking at something off in the distance, and when I stepped out to see what he was looking at, I gasped.
Welcome to Thiese.
Off in the distance, floating over the apartment structure to the southwest was... well, it was... It was something. It was a large structure that looked like a cross between a boat and a thundercloud, only many times the size of a vertibug, and loaded with what had to be giant cannons. Flying around it were many black armored Pegasi illuminated by the setting sun, as well as more vertibugs than the remnants had had before, and a few other flying machines I didn't really understand.
That is a raptor Nacreus. It was partially knocked to the ground when the rain boom that cleared the sky went off, but it was flying low and the damage was able to be repaired.
He sounded a little bit proud of the giant thing. It scared me though. If the remnants had completely dominated the skies about Thiese before, now their hold was unbreakable. How long would it take for them to decide to just take the city? And when that happened, who could possibly stop them? Not that there was much of a city left to conquer. As I stepped into the Thiese streets, I heard nothing. There were no sounds of ponies talking and laughing among each other. There was not even any of the ever-present music drifting from the casinos onto the streets. All there was to hear was a harsh wind whipping through the tall buildings and the loud clicking of my pip-bug. There were so few lights. Normally there would be bright lights shining from every window and sign. Great beacons that proudly proclaimed that this wasn't a mere wasteland settlement. It was a city like those of old, proud of its accomplishments and more than willing to shove them in your face. Now it seemed dead, or deader. Without the noise and lights, I could really get a good look at the city. Its tall buildings were in disrepair, many close to falling over, and even the well-maintained ones looked skeletal. The paved road was cracked and shattered in places in ways I hadn't noticed before, and the great neon signs seemed cracked and half-hanging on. Overall, it was lonely. A great expanse of buildings and roads and walkways, now all empty but for us. Well, there were some lights peeking out from the major 4 casinos, but they seemed paltry compared to what it had been. Between the raptor flying menacingly overhead and the deserted streets, I barely felt like I knew the city at all. Everything was changing too quickly for me to keep up, and it was my fault. Well, not really. It was true that I'd failed to stop what had happened, and that my failure was impressive, but I hadn't caused it, had I? Dragonslayer and whoever he was working for had done it. Maybe I failed to stop him, but it was still his plans. His hoofs. This wasn't another Kharkov, where I was the pony who set the town on fire. I had only failed to stop him. This was his doing, not mine. All of his. And if I ever meet him again, I'd tear off his leg and beat him with it. When I met him again, I was positive that once I told Mr. House what I had learned, he'd fit me up with a new leg and send me out after him. It was a long time coming, and that bastard deserved it.
Silver?
Flair was a few feet ahead of me.
Hurry up, you're unprotected like that, and so is Serenity.
That was all I needed to get me going at a really quick pace. Despite the fact she was still wearing that black fireproof sheet, though she'd taken off the gas mask, she wasn't protected much from radiation.
How will the Black Salamander?
The Flair probably wouldn't know of my internal shortened version of the hotel's name.
How will it be, safe?
Well,
Flair said as he quickened his pace.
Ever hear of a spell in a box?
What?
My knowledge of magic was paltry at best. The most I knew was that when my shoulder burned, magic was around.
Is it like when you enchant a box?
Sort of.
He said as we neared the hotel.
I'm not a unicorn, so I'm no expert on magical wealth sets, but from my understanding it's a spell you put into a box that goes off either when triggered, or when certain conditions are met. Really advanced stuff, or so I'm told. The point is that after that whole apocalypse thing, Mr. House put a lot of work into thinking about how to use boxes or spells to help if something like that were to happen again.
Mr. House is an Earth pony,
I said. Given he was an Earth pony, all the thoughts in the world wouldn't cast a spell.
Doesn't mean he's dumb. He happened to know quite a few unicorns, and some of them turn all ghoulified with him. Blah 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 blah. He used anti-radiation magic, which exists but in too small an area to normally be useful. Put it into a box, put the box in the wall of his hotel, and BAM! It sucks up radiation before it gets in. Takes a lot of them, I hear, and he sold the idea to the other hotels. It's how he got a lot of his post-war wealth, I think. I may be making some of this up, but generally that's how it works.
If there's a spell that clears radiation, why is it still around?
I had to ask because that part made no sense to me at all.
There's less than there was. Anyway, it takes a lot of energy to clear small space, and it seeps in from infected areas eventually. The spello boxes won't last more than a few weeks at most.
Then every pony above would have to retreat too. At least it was a little bit of hope. With my pip buck still ticking, I decided I had spent far too much time in deadly radiation and increased my hobbling speed to the BS's door. Flair reached it first and was already knocking by the time I walked up to it.
Open up,
he said loudly.
I said open.
Then there was a long, worrying pause when there was no answer from the beyond the door. But eventually a voice spoke over the intercom beside the entrance.
Who is it?
It's Flair, Captain Flair of the Enclave Remnants. I'm under orders to bring in one of you Haze who got caught outside after the blast.
Flair said through the door.
So you really should open. We have a civilian out here without protection.
Designation?
The voice replied, irritatingly calm.
Starmare!
I yelled through the door.
My designation is Starmare!
There was an even longer pause before the voice spoke up again.
Ah, you. Mr. House had been waiting for you.
Well, that sounded ominous.
1 second. Disengaging emergency door.
There was a loud clangor from the other side of the wooden door for what seemed like hours, though probably only a minute, before the door finally opened.
Well, come in,
the voice said. I shoved Flair through the door and followed quickly, and before the door could even fully close behind me, something suddenly hugged me around the neck.
Starmare! What?
I took a step back, dragging along the mare who hugged me.
Oh!
I realized it was the strangely perky and affectionate Tight Lips.
Ha! And here I was betting that you were dead. Serves me right. I made the same bet last time you vanished off the face of the wasteland, you know.
She winked at me.
You simply have to share your stories over a drink.
That was not going to happen.
But you have things to do first, no doubt, and I'm simply positive that Mr. House will want to see you. Because he told me he wanted to see you. I'm intuitive like that.
She chuckled to herself and took a few steps back.
So, welcome back to the Black Salamander.
She waved a hoof to the casino floor, and to my surprise, it was different. The slot machines were pushed together with poker tables on top to make makeshift shacks, and the pit in the center of the floor was filled with supplies of all sorts. And ponies. The entire place was completely crowded with ponies, even more than it was when all the NCA ponies were getting cybernetics.
I thought the gang leaders didn't take in any city ponies.
That's what I heard in the tunnels anyway.
Oh, Mr. House didn't.
Tight Lips seemed amused with my mistake.
Most of the ponies work for Mr. House or are family ponies who did. He kept most of his employees in rooms upstairs, but when the bomb went off, he moved them down here. That way the spells that keep the place radiation-free are more contained and will last longer. The first few floors of hospital and research are protected too, but anything above isn't. Mr. House is still in his room because ghouls love that radiation stuff.
That all actually made a lot of sense. And while Tight Lips said all these ponies worked for Mr. House, I wasn't sure. Maybe Mr. House had a heart under that decomposing flesh after all.
Doctor!
My mind snapped back.
Serenity, my daughter!
Tight Lips looked over my back and looked over the sleeping filly with an almost grim look. As grim as Tight Lips ever looked.
You sure have her dolled up, but that wouldn't protect against radiation. I'll get her into a cleansing right away.
She gave out a sharp whistle and a pony came running up from somewhere in the casino shantytown. He quickly helped Serenity Flair's back and carried her off to the doctor's floor. I didn't look away from my filly until she passed out of view from between a set of double doors.
She'll be fine.
Flair put a hoof gently on my back.
She's a tough filly. Always has been.
I know,
I said quietly. She was a tough little filly because I dragged her through the mud. Even though she wanted to come with me, I still wished she didn't have to be so tough.
I know,
I repeated to myself to make sure I believed it, before turning back to Tight Lips.
Thanks. No problem, we're colleagues, compadres, sisters in a way.
She perked up.
Speaking of friends, you're super lucky, did I ever tell you that?
No, and probably for a reason.
Because your friend Pearls or whatever, she got here just in the nick of time to be allowed to stay, and she's been a great help. You sure know how to pick 'em.
She winked at me, and it took me a second to get what she was implying.
She's just...
I fought the blush away and just shook my head.
Oh, good, because I was thinking of picking me off some of that.
She paused to laugh.
Just kidding, I'm straight. She will want to see you though, but you have things to do first, and fraternizing will have to wait. Things like seeing Mr. House about that ugly-ass leg of yours. That simply won't do, so off you go!
She shoved me lightly.
I'll even let you bring that cute bug friend of yours, even if he's a filthy Enclave vulture.
She turned to him.
No offense.
Even Flare seemed a bit confused.
None taken?
She nodded at this and trotted off towards one of the security ponies guarding the door.
She's weird,
Flare said when she was out of earshot.
Yep.
I sighed and looked towards the elevator.
Let's go see what Mr. House wants.
Probably for me to run off into another suicide mission to lose more body parts. I was starting to wonder if I was the only agent he had, because it was either that or I was the most expendable. Without waiting for Flare to reply, I started off on slow walk towards the elevator, and did my best to ignore the stares of ponies milling around. It was clear as I navigated the mess of ponies that these were Mr. House's ponies, because nearly all of them had some sort of noticeable implant or another, and all were staring at my ugly back leg in mild disgust. It infuriated me. Sure, they couldn't know that it was built by a filly in a hostile tunnel after saving me from bleeding out, but it didn't mean they had the right to judge my daughter's work. It was better than anything any of them could make at that age, or ever. Shaming a mob wasn't on my to-do list, however, so I kept walking until I reached the elevator. Flare hit the button to Mr. House's floor and the doors finally closed behind me. I let out a sigh.
She did a great job,
Flare said as he put his helmet back on.
Your leg, and Serenity, that is.
He apparently saw the looks too.
Considering she's a filly, she should get a damn medal.
What she should get was a mother who didn't drag her into situations like that, or at least one with a brain. Instead, she had me.
Hey.
Flare tilted his masked head and stared at my... collar.
What?
I looked down at myself and wasn't sure what he was looking at. I was still wearing the modified black fireproof barding that was made for me. He seemed to be staring at the collar pockets built in for easy access. Having no magic sucked sometimes, but there wasn't much in them. Emergency ammo, emergency grenade, spark pulse emitter, Mad-X, and note. Wait.
Was that there before?
Flare pointed at the same note I saw. Apparently he was very perceptive.
No.
I carefully pulled it out of my pocket and laid it on the ground to read.
Room 829. What?
How the heck did that note even get in there?
That's your room.
It was a good thing he said that, because I wouldn't have noticed. Really, I forgot what number it was. Maybe the note was something I put in my pocket to remind me what my room number was. It didn't look like Serenity's writing though, and if it were mine, it would be completely illegible. So I doubted that.
Might as well check it out.
I hit the number 8 button on the elevator pad.
It's on the way.
And a little extra radiation never hurt any pony.
You know what I never got enough of? Sarcasm.
That reminds me,
I said as our ride rocked to a stop on the 8th floor.
Do you know what happened to my BEL?
I walked into the hall and heard my pip-buck ticking warily at me.
It was in my room before.
What? Oh.
Flare followed after me, clanking in his heavy armor.
Starscream came in to check on you, saw it lying around, lectured me, and took it into private storage. Apparently having such a weapon lying around was just asking for trouble.
Well, fuck him too.
I didn't touch it at all, but damn was it tempting.
I wouldn't trust you with it,
I said as we walked into the hall. Immediately I could hear my pip-buck starting to click slowly.
Not that I trust myself with it either.
Really? There should be a law barring me from getting close to megaspells. Or explosives.
Why not? I carry enough ordnance with me to double the size of that BLL launcher explosion, and you haven't said anything about that.
I was a bit suspicious of that number, but having never seen a BEL explosion, I really couldn't doubt it. More likely than not, he was just trying to trick me into letting him use it.
Maybe.
It sort of worked. His arguments, that is. On the one hoof, I didn't trust a drug addict with a weapon like that. But on the other, having that sort of power on my side could be crucial. I just wasn't sure the risk was worth the potential reward. Maybe if we had a super dangerous job fighting a dragon or something.
One thing at a time.
I really needed a list of things I needed to get done. Step 1, see what's waiting for me in my room. Step 2, talk to Mr. House. Get a bullshit job and some new body parts. Step 3, find out who is behind the attack in the train station. Step 4, kill them a lot. Step 5, take a long nap. Yeah, that would do. I guess at some point I should add help Mr. House take over dice, but I really wasn't sure I wanted to do that anymore. Still, the last help put my brain in order. So on to step 1. I opened the door to my old room. And there was nothing in there. Well, there was stuff in there. A few empty beer bottles I hadn't gotten around to cleaning up, and a bed I'd left unmade. A few odds and ends, but nothing out of order.
Huh.
I guess it was just something someone wrote down for me so I could remember where my room was. With a sigh, I walked in. I guess I could pick up some of the things I'd left, now that I was here.
Oh, dramatic.
Flair had a way with words. He flew past me and looked out the window on the far side of the room.
It's a nice view, you know.
I didn't know. I tended to avoid that window and just shut the curtain. I didn't like thinking about how high up I was.
It's just empty down there. You know, I've lived in this city all my life. I've seen the city grow and shape. I've been witness to gang wars and threats from the outside. One year there was a drought that nearly brought the city to its knees. But I've never seen it so empty before. So quiet.
He paused and turned away from the window.
I don't think I like it.
Me either. Against my better judgment, I walked over to the window and looked out from it. It was a good view, wasn't it? Everything down below looked so small and I could see so much. Was this what Pegasi saw every time they flew? I could almost see the allure. That was until my stomach twisted and for a second I felt like I was falling again. I had to step back quickly and take a deep breath to calm myself down. I really wanted to use one of the Madexes, but I had to ration them. It wasn't that I was lacking for them, but with dice dying, I wasn't sure where I could get more.
If you are afraid of heights, it would be advisable not to stand next to someplace high,
a familiar voice said from behind me. When I turned, I saw nothing, but soon that nothing faded and Platinum Haze stood there with a smile on her face. I had known something was in the room from the burning sensation, so I wasn't positive it was her.
We are sorry. Did we surprise you? That was not our intention.
Oh, hey, Haze.
Flair waved a wing at her, which was strangely familiar.
Oh, of course not,
I said softly and walked over to her. I had intended to nuzzle the beautiful alicorn as I had before, but something was different. I couldn't reach, and for some reason my pip-buck was clicking more.
Oh,
she said quickly and backed up.
It would be best you do not get too close.
What? Are you taller? With her further backed up, I could see she was taller, by a fair bit too. So I was fairly lost as to what the heck was going on.
Sorry. Tight Lips delivered the message to you then, right?
Message? Oh, the note in my pocket. And Tight Lips giving me a hug. Damn, she was good at that. Don't know why she made it so secret.
She said that she had to let young love bloom but couldn't risk House finding out.
That was interesting, but it didn't explain the size difference.
We are sorry about our size. My kind reacts this way to high concentrations of radiation. It is one of the reasons why Mother believed we would be the ideal race to rebuild Equestria.
That was different.
I'm just glad you're okay, but why are you here?
The Alicorn looked over at Flare with a bit of confusion.
Did you not inform her of the situation? We thought we had requested such.
Sorry, Haze.
Flare said half-heartedly.
There was a lot to tell her. I guess I forgot.
The Alicorn cast a sharp glare at Flare that, along with her increased size, made her almost terrifying. But it faded quickly into a resigned smile.
Okay.
She turned back to me.
Not long after the explosion, as crowds began storming into the tunnels, a group approached the orphanage. Celestia's vision. They came back with what we could only describe as a mob. Somehow they knew where we were hidden, and attempted to take the children by force.
What? I felt myself panicking at the thought, but her calmness led me to believe it wasn't as bad as it could be.
It is, well, we cannot lie. We were worried. Our shield was fading, and rounding up folds in a panic was difficult for Diamond Sky and the others. We were convinced we would have to sacrifice ourselves to protect them.
Part of me wanted to ask why she didn't just kill them back, but I already knew the answer.
Your friend Flare, he was able to save us. He used a flashbang to blind the crowd, then engineered a tunnel collapse. It did not stop the mob, but slowed them down enough for Diamond Sky to teleport the folds to safety.
Spitshine too, right?
I had to make sure.
And, to where?
Yes.
The Alicorn nodded.
Of course. The fool, was that her name? We did not have a chance to question her, given the circumstances.
She looked to Flare for confirmation on that and didn't continue until he nodded.
As for where they were taken, we are not allowed to disclose that information, but it is a safe place. Far away. We had it set up first in the event of an emergency, though we can say we did not expect to need to use it so soon. We are to wait here until the time is right to return.
She seemed upset by that.
We hope that the children are okay. We will miss them.
What will you do until then?
Who knew how long it would take the radiation to fade?
We do not know. We are unsure of what to do with free time. We imagine we can help you, but we can't think that our particular help would be of much use.
Right, the pacifist thing.
I'd always appreciate your help.
I gave her my best smile, which was just big enough that I looked sincere, but not enough to stretch my facial scars that much.
I guess you can stay in my room for now. I won't be getting much use out of it.
She gave a sigh and nodded.
Thank you.
She seemed to stare at the floor with a sad look on her face.
I'm sure you'll see the folds soon enough.
I did my best to sound reassuring, but really I didn't know for sure. She looked up from the floor to stare at me with her strange yellow eyes. She looked like she was about to say something, but stopped herself and scrunched up her muzzle in confusion.
Where's your foal? We would very much like to see her.
She frowned for a second and looked over at my back where Serenity often sat, then gasped.
Your leg!
Oh!
I felt like an idiot for not telling her.
It's a long story.
By the time I told her what happened, I realized that either the story really wasn't that long, or that I sucked at details. Possibly both. Either way, I ended with telling her that Serenity was being looked at by doctors, probably for radiation sickness that they could easily cure. At least I hoped.
I'm sorry.
She gave a heavy sigh.
We wish we could have assisted you at that time, but we are curious. You stated that your leg was cut off, but where did you acquire that replacement?
Somehow, in my short storytelling, I completely forgot the most important part.
Serenity made it, or rather modified it from the old one which she built after saving my life. I think she killed a few bugs too.
I gave a long pause to think about that.
She's pretty amazing, isn't she?
How could a filly like that not have her cutie mark yet?
Yes, she is.
Platinum Haze smiled at me and moved forward and kissed me on the cheek, before quickly retreating to her spot across the room again. We are sorry for taking time away from your day. We are certain you have things to do. We will remain here for now, but we may go down to check on Serenity for you. We worry about her. My cheeks started to burn up at the kiss, or maybe the radiation she was emitting, but I had more important things to worry about. I closed my eyes and nodded.
Yeah, need to see Mr. House. Thanks for caring. I am going to find out who did this. The radiation. I'll find out why and stop them.
Someone had to, and I was the only one with any clue at all.
And the orphanage can move back. That'll be great, right?
I waited until she nodded before I turned and left the room. No part of me really wanted to leave Platinum Haze, but I had a job to do and blah 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 blah. I was hired gun, so off I went to my employer. Some things never change.
It's not right,
were the words we heard Mr. House speak to himself as we closed in on his room. As a ghoul, radiation actually healed him, so he never moved from his old room, or even bothered to close his door, it seemed.
It's not the same.
Flare and I entered his room to find him staring at one of the screens on his giant computer terminal.
Do you know,
he said to us when he entered the room,
that I stood in this exact same place when it happened?
In this context, the "it" didn't need to be explained.
My aides were telling me I should leave, yelling at me about a vertebuck in the stable and how it should go. Reports were flooding and they said Manhattan, Flinkyard, Cloudsdale, Canalot, Uvington, even Toronto, all gone. Yet I stood. For the longest time, it stood still, halfway between panic and eerie calm. I thought perhaps we dodged a bullet, that we could survive.
He looked out his window, which I now realized was shattered.
Then everything was fire. Thousands died in the flash, and I was thrown back. When I awoke, my skin was peeling, and the world was dead. I could feel the radiation, feel it keeping me alive. At the time it was strange, but by now it's normal.
He turned back to look at me with glowing green eyes.
Something is wrong. The radiation, there's not enough. In 250 years, I have made a lot of memories, but that one, those early moments, I'll never forget.
So maybe the combination of all the megaspells going off made it feel different than the ones that went off this time.
Flare said.
Maybe, but no, it's still too weak. If whatever went off was a megaspell, it was a weak one. Bigger than a Bellfire egg, but it wasn't the same as the ones I've seen.
He stopped and looked directly at me, his eyes reminding me of how the laughing stallion looked right before he exploded.
You were there. You need to tell me, is it true? The rumors that the Minotaurs rigged a megaspell to that freak who fought the Batmare.
He seemed tired and frustrated. Though I admit I wasn't the best at reading faces, especially ghoul faces.
Maybe,
was my reply.
Sort of. Do you remember what I told you of the facility in Simpleheart?
He nodded slowly.
It was like that. He was the megaspell. It was like Simpleheart, only it worked.
I then added quickly.
I don't think it was the Minotaurs though. They seemed confused and denied it.
And yet,
he added sharply.
I'm sure you have no theories of your own.
He turned back to his computer.
But I believe you. This was not Minotaur work. If only for that megaspell technology would be beyond them. Even during the Great War, they borrowed weapons from zebras. And
he tapped something on his computer.
Those files you sent me indicate that the Pony megaspell research data was sent to Toronto, well beyond Minotaur reach even now.
Where?
I moved slightly closer so I could see he had a map on his terminal.
Oh?
His voice broke from cocky to confused for a split second.
Aglow. That's the name now. I always forget.
He quickly composed himself.
It was the capital of Caledonia before the war, and now it's the largest city in the NCA.
If I remembered correctly, it was also the city Serenity came from before she was with the Watchers in Dice.
I'm not sure where in Aglo, but it hardly matters. Never has a single Minotaur set foot in that city. Every pony agrees, and while it doesn't completely rule them out, it's enough to shine doubt. Thank you for giving me this information, Hired. But now we need to get to another matter.
He closed what he was looking at in the terminal.
Where were you? My only operative close to the scene vanished for a day and a half. Do you have any idea the disadvantage it put me in?
I really should have thought of a decent lie before Hoof, so I just blurted out the first thing that came to mind.
I was taken prisoner by the Minotaurs. They thought I had something to do with the explosion and didn't believe me when I denied it. I managed to escape, but...
I turned around slowly and showed off my new amputation.
Not unscathed.
Mr. House visibly grimaced at the leg, but then... stopped. He leaned in and inspected the leg curiously.
Isn't this the same one your filly built?
I was a bit amazed at his memory, considering...
Yes, I can see it. She modified to work as a hind leg. That's impressive.
Yeah, she built it after stopping my blood loss. And while fighting red scorpions. And there was the radiation.
I said slowly, as if not really believing it myself.
I see.
He turned away.
We'll need to get you a better one. And once this radiation thing is over, I'd like to set your filly up in an apprenticeship position.
Wait, what?
If she's this skilled, so young, I want her trained right. And I want her working for me.
I'm sure she'd be ecstatic.
To put it lightly. I couldn't wait to tell her.
But just all of a sudden...
I wasn't aware just how talented she was. Does she have her cutie mark yet?
I shook my head, which prompted him to continue.
Good. Maybe she'll get cybernetic cutie mark if we nurture her gift. I've never seen a pony with that as a special talent. It'd be amazing.
If he said so. I didn't really get the importance of cutie marks anyway. I mean, my special talent was being as dumb as a rock or something.
Okay.
I shuffled awkwardly.
We'll still need to get you a new leg. And there are a few things I need to get done concerning the documents you brought me the other day. But those can wait until you're fitted with a new leg. I won't bother asking you what model you want, I'm sure you won't understand.
He looked at my foreleg for a second and hummed.
We really should add a sword to that. You fight hoof to hoof, right?
I nodded.
Right. I'll have my technicians add a blade.
Apparently, I didn't get a choice.
Okay.
I said, and Flair just snickered at me.
I'll send a message. Unless you have something better to do.
His tone suggested I didn't have anything better to do. He turned back to give Flair a strange look.
I suggest going down there soon. I need you fixed up as soon as possible. There are precarious times. Das is changing, whether we like it or not. And the winner will be he who acts first.
He let out a sigh and looked out the window, only this time he looked up at the raptor looming over the entire city.
What are you waiting for?
He snapped when he noticed me pause.
Go!
Flair and I shared a look when we turned to leave his room, but neither of us said anything. There was nothing left to be said. I had my orders, and I'm sure Flair had his, so all we could do was do our jobs. As we walked together towards the elevator, I brought up the courage to ask Flair a question.
If there was ever a time... if the Enclave told you to kill me... would you?
Flair snorted through his iron mask and said,
Who's to say they haven't already?
Was that supposed to be a joke? I really didn't know, and I suppose I didn't want to know because I never asked. Though I'm not sure why the Enclave would even want me dead. I was also not sure why some pony would think detonating a megaspell around Dice would be a good idea either, so clearly we couldn't go by my understanding of how the world works. I just had to be confident that Flair would never actually try to kill me, and if Celestia forbid, he did try that I could stop him and kick some sense into him. For all I like to complain about the Pegasus, I'd rather see him alive than dead. It was then, when we were walking into the elevator and I was fully confident that Flare wouldn't try to kill me, the little voice in the back of my head asked,
"What if you were ordered to kill him?"
Then I would kill him. I turned my head to look over at the armor-clad Pegasus. He was flapping his wings impatiently and tapping his hoofs against the floor with his head down. He looked up suddenly and towards the digital sign above the door that said what floor we were on. I could hear a subtle sigh emitting from his mask and he looked back at the floor. Actually, I don't think I would kill Flare. Instead, I would simply quit the job and refuse to accept it. My personal code, or whatever you wanted to call it, forbade me from breaking a job I agreed to, so all I would have to do is not agree. The way I saw it was that any boss that wanted me to kill Flare wasn't some pony worth working for.
There's smoke coming from your ears.
Flare said, breaking the silence quite suddenly. I was about to ask what he meant, but he added,
You had that look on your face like you're thinking hard, or trying to take a shit.
Just because I resolved never to kill the Pegasus didn't mean he didn't deserve a smack from time to time. So I reached out and kicked one of his forelegs out from under him. He apparently wasn't expecting it because he started to fall. Unfortunately, he managed to catch himself with a wing and push himself back to a standing position, but I think I got my point across. Eventually, we reached the medical floor, and just like Mr. House had said, the doctors were waiting for us. Or rather, they were waiting for me because they chased Flare away as soon as we entered. Apparently, they thought he was a distraction or something with that heavy armor clanking around. It was the same process as the last time I got cybernetic work done. I was taken into a small white room, stripped down, and placed on a soft bed. They put a mask over my face and made me count down from 5. Marigold asked me hurriedly,
"What are you planning?"
as I stomped out of her house with blood still on my hoofs. Despite saving her from the raiders that were invading Mayford, she was surprisingly unhelpful. She kept babbling about the Crimson Hoof and Smooth Tongue and such things, but she didn't understand. None of that mattered. Wildfire and Foundation were still alive, so I would have to save them. What else would I do?
"I'm a guard, right?"
I stopped near a ramp to a lower level. To an outside, Mayford would seem like a mess, but if you lived there long enough, you got a feel for its oddities.
Yes.
Marigold would know. She was always my boss, even if she was a bit of a coward.
Then I have to protect them. All of them.
Wildfire and Foundation in particular.
It's my job, right? So that's what I'm going to do.
I turned back to look at her. She was a pitiful sight with her eyes bloodshot red and her golden mane a frizzled mess.
You're going to help, until we can rescue others. First, I need to know more.
She seemed confused as she tried to dry her eyes.
How many? Where did they take ponies? Any escaped?
I doubted she knew anything, and I wasn't sure what I'd do with the information once I got it. But it seemed the important sort of thing to have.
I'm not sure. I saw a lot. 24, maybe more.
Okay, that was a lot.
We can't fight that many. I can.
Though I wasn't sure of my words. I had never really been in an actual fight to the death before that night. So far I was doing good, though, and I was strong. I would need help for sure, but I was confident.
Did you see where they took the others? I didn't really. I just saw them from my window and heard them outside my door. Some ponies might not have been grabbed yet.
She was right, I realized then. I could still hear a few cries from below. Ponies were being corralled, no doubt. There might be time to save others, though.
The silver!
Marigold was pointing and my eyes snapped to the side. In the gloom I could see a unicorn with a rifle leading another by a length of chain. What the fuck are you two doing? The stallion snorted, walking closer. The glow from his horn was enough to illuminate his ugly face. He had some sort of hideous scar that made it look like something had tried to tear his face off and eat it, but he had it hastily sewn back on. If you want your fucking kneecaps, I suggest you drop the weapon, freak. I think he was addressing me.
No.
If he seriously thought that was an option, he must have been as stupid as he was ugly.
Bitch, that wasn't an option. If you come quietly, you won't be hurt much. But if you resist, things will go bad.
He gave me a sickly smile, as if that would convince me. Not that it was his smile that caught my attention. Rather, my eyes were drawn to the faint glow to my side. Didn't look at what I saw, save for a parting glance, because I knew he'd see me. He had floated his rifle off the side of the walkway we were on to bring it around on me, unseen. Except I did see, and that gave me that advantage.
Okay.
I said through the rifle in my mouth.
Okay.
I tried my best to make my voice deflate. It had to convince him, or I was as good as dead. I leaned down in an apparent attempt to drop the rifle on the ground. At the last second, I bucked. My hind leg slammed into the floating rifle just as the stallion pulled the trigger. The bullet flew wide and rang against the metal walkway, and thankfully not into me, as he desperately positioned his wobbling gun for another shot. I pulled the trigger of my gun. Unlike him, I hit my target and his knee shattered in bits of bone and gore. Instantly his magic faded from his horn and he collapsed. Marigold was sobbing in shock as I walked over to the whimpering stallion and finished him off.
Marigold, please!
I had to hope the rest of raiders would think the shot was from them executing an unruly citizen. The sobbing might help that effect, but it was still hard to move around unseen like that. Marigold reluctantly stopped at my command, so I was free to speak to the pony the stallion had chained.
Are you alright?
I recognized the mare right away as Starbell. She was always a fiery little thing, so seeing her tied up was... It was wrong. She gave me a small confident nod and spat in the direction of the corpse.
Good. Marigold, could you search the body for any keys?
If he did have some, they might just work on any other captive we found. Marigold was most unhelpful and refused to touch a dead body, so I had to go searching. Thankfully I found the keyring on a string around his neck rather quickly, and I unlocked the collar around Starbell's neck and fetlocks.
Thanks, Silver. I should have known they'd never take you. Not without a whole army backing them up.
She gave me a weak smile.
So what's the plan?
She walked over and grabbed the dead pony's rifle.
We can't take them all on. We can try. First we need to freeze the others.
I slit the string with the keys around my neck.
They caught us by surprise, but if we arm, we can drive them out. That's the plan.
She looked over to Marigold.
Is she okay? I'm fine,
Marigold said.
If we get out of here alive, we should run to Stable 42. Smooth Tongue, he can...
Starbell looked confused at this statement.
It's the only way.
Well, I'm not willing to risk lives by running there and back,
Starbell replied.
We need to fight.
But if we had Smooth Tongue and the Crimson Hoof, if they protected us again. Who's up there?
A voice called from a lower floor. From the distance, I could see a silhouette staring right at us.
Stay right there! Ponies escaped up there!
The mare yelled at the top of her lungs, and all of Mareford became aware. I could hear the pattering of hoofs starting to run.
Run now, talk later!
I started off in a gallop. I could hear my two comrades behind me, but behind them I could start to hear the rest of the raider gang converging on us. We had to move fast, but luckily I knew Mareford better than any pony, which also meant I knew how to escape.
This way!
I said just loud enough for the two behind me to hear. Instead of turning for one of the ramps down to a lower floor, I just kept running until I found the shack I was looking for. It was flush against the wall of the warehouse Mareford was built in, and at the time unoccupied. When Starbell and Marigold entered, I slammed the door behind them. We had to be quick, and they had to not chicken out, or we'd all end up dead.
There's nothing here, we're trapped!
Marigold cried out. It took a lot of reserve not to smack her.
Here!
I moved quickly across the room to where the bed was. I pushed it out of the way to reveal a hole large enough for a pony to crawl through. On the other side was a small lip on the outside of the structure, barely large enough for some pony to stand on, but it was an escape.
Quickly!
Marigold balked for a second when she realized what she would have to stand on, but her resolve steeled when she looked back at the door and realized her other option. After she was through, Starbell quickly followed. When it was my turn, I crawled out backwards, dragging the bed with me to partially cover up the hole. It wasn't perfect. The raiders might find the hole, but not quickly. The wind whipped violently at us and nearly shook me off the small ledge. When I looked down at the dark abyss below me, though I wasn't scared, just more secure in my decision. This plan was going to work. It had to.
There!
Not far from the back wall of Mareford was a cliff face that rose above the town and provided a great lookout spot. More importantly, that said cliff had many grooves and ledges large enough to fit ponies. I had snuck out of Mareford many times in the past when I was a child, or when I wanted to meet Wildfire at the guardhouse without being noticed.
Jump!
I commanded. But... As Marigold tried to protest, Starbell jumped. It was easy enough for the small mare and she made it onto the cliff without issue. Marigold gave a short sniff and wiped her eye before jumping also. She almost didn't make it when part of the rocks she landed on crumbled beneath her, but Star caught her and helped her back up. The golden-maned mare was shaken but unhurt.
Okay,
I said when I landed beside them.
Marigold, that way!
I pointed the opposite direction from where we were facing, where the cliff path snaked upwards.
Leads towards the top. You can go to Stable 42 from there. Me and Star will go rescue the others, okay?
She gave a tentative nod.
Yes, good plan. Silver, thank you.
She suddenly wrapped her legs around me in a tight hug. Now, I was awkward at the best of times, so right then I must have looked ridiculous patting her on the back. Eventually, she let go and started up the cliff on her journey, leaving me and Starbell.
Yeah, what she said. But don't feel too bad, I'm just not the huggy sort.
Star smirked at me.
Yeah, me either.
I started to walk down the sloped path towards the ground. It was so dark out I could barely see my hoofs, but I knew the way well enough that I didn't need to. It was a strange path, and for some reason there were a few spots on it where rusted metal poles jutted out from the ground, blocking me from the edge. Whatever they were for, when I saw them, it let me know how close to the ground we were, as otherwise the darkness was so impenetrable I couldn't tell. When we reached the bottom, I took a deep breath of cold night air. Wildfire and Foundation were still out there, and I had to find them, or die trying. I couldn't have been more glad that I finished that dream. I knew where it led, and it was not a place I wanted to go ever again. My eyes opened and I was immediately blinded by bright hospital lights. After a few seconds of whining groggily, I sat up. My new hind leg stung like a bitch, and when I looked to the table beside me I could see an empty Medex syringe. Only one though, which wasn't nearly enough. Still, I didn't want them to think I was trying to OD, so I would have to wait before I went searching through my bags for another. At least until they inspected me and let me leave. In the meantime, I inspected my new hind leg. It was the same color as my foreleg, but the style was very different. Instead of skeletal, it was full, and looked rather like a metal cylinder in shape. All along it were various ports for devices I was unfamiliar with, probably more spying equipment. "Oh, you're awake." My eyes darted to the door where one of my doctors stood. "How do you like it? It's a relatively new design, completely quiet, and it comes with a shotgun that goes off on impact." That wasn't going to backfire at all. "And your foreleg has been modified with a retractable blade. There was some concern about, accidents." Mr. House didn't trust me with built-in weaponry, and really, I didn't blame him. So I implemented a safety feature. The sword is controlled via your mind, and simply thinking will allow you to use it, but only if a physical safety switch is hit. He walked over and pointed to the small button on the side of my hoof cuff. "Try it out." Cue me accidentally stabbing out my remaining eyeball. Actually, when I hit the switch, nothing happened. And it wasn't until I pointed my hoof away and actually thought about it that the thin blade shot out. It was about 1/3 of a meter long, and really thin. It's a special alloy. It should be hard to break and easy to maintain. Carefully, I mentally retracted the blade and turned the safety back on. I made a mental note not to forget to turn the safety on. I wanted to perform an update to your eye, but there were concerns about the odd intelligence chip you have installed, and I didn't wish to endanger you. Thanks. I'm sorry for going through this so fast, but you had a visitor who said it was important. About time, Doc. Flair walked into the hospital without his armor, and looked like he desperately needed a shower after being cooped up inside it for so long. You look good hired. Okay, you look better than you did. You've never looked good. At least Flair was honest. Serenity's up, and I think she had something to tell you.
Serenity!
I leapt from the bed without a second thought, and the impact on the ground to my newly installed limbs caused jolts of pain to run through me.
Where?
I ignored the pain. It didn't matter. Nothing else mattered. I'll show you, Flair said, stifling a chuckle. You're so predictable. This way, I'll show you to her room. There were many questions I'd normally be asking. Like, how long was I out? Where was all my stuff? Why wasn't Flair in armor anymore? But who cared about that shit? My daughter needed me, so I had to go to her. Flair showed me through a series of odd-smelling halls before he reached the room where Serenity was. I found myself nervous for some reason and hesitated going in. She had saved my life back in the tunnels without a doubt, and I had almost gotten her killed by bringing her with me. Of course, the other option hadn't been much better, but there was that pang of guilt I always got. I should have been a better mother to her, but I didn't know how. I steeled my resolve and moved to go through the door. But again, I faltered. What if she wanted to leave? Stay with Platinum Haze at the orphanage? That'd be a good thing, right? Except she couldn't know that was no longer a possibility. If that was what this was about, how could I disappoint her?
Just talk to her,
a familiar voice said in my head, and instantly I felt silly. I couldn't have a pretend discussion about something when I had a real one to attend to. Worrying about things she hadn't said yet wasn't going to get me anywhere but one step closer to death by anxiety. So I just opened the door.
Mama!
Came a shrill cry as soon as my head stuck through the door. Before I could respond, the little filly had wrapped her hoofs around my neck. It seemed like forever since I had seen her without a black fireproof outfit on. She was wearing it the entire time she was passed out.
Mama, look!
I did. Well, I had been anyway. I was admiring how clean she managed to keep her pink coat despite everything, but when she said, "Look," I knew what she meant. There, on her coat, was what she had been waiting for.
Isn't it awesome? It's just so perfect! Look, see!
For being sick, she sure was hyper.
It's awesome, sweetie. It fits you so well,
I said in a soft tone as I admired her cutie mark. It was a much better one than mine. Hers actually made sense. It occurred to me that she must have gotten it back in the tunnels, when she saved my life and made a leg on the spot. It made sense, but with everything that was happening, I hadn't thought to take her outfit off to check. On her flank was a picture of a heart. The left half of it was bright pink, enough to stand out against her pale coat, while the other half was comprised of 3 yellow gears and a snaking yellow wire on a grey frame.
Level up, companion perk, emergency mechanics. Serenity now has a +30 chance to complete mechanics checks, and an extra +15 when the check has to do with cybernetics.
Your narrator for the story was Visual Pony. The story was edited by Visual Pony. The author of the story is no one. The voice of Dr. House was provided by Robo Turbo.
We here at Pony&Wolf Productions thank these amazing patrons of ours for their monthly support, without which all of this would not be possible. We sincerely appreciate it, and every dollar helps, is needed, and will be used to keep us going to produce audiobooks for your continued enjoyment. It is, now more than ever, important that you support your favorite creators if possible, due to YouTube changing in a way that is not very friendly to content creators. Especially small content creators, like us. In recent months, the names you see on screen have enabled Midnight and Visual Pony to keep going and only having to sell off part of their belongings to not end up on the street. As an incentive for everyone, Visual Pony has broken a vow and has promised to read and record FalloutEquestria, Murky number 7, should the monthly support reach $1,500. To be clear, this is the absolute minimum amount needed to keep the apartment and all bills paid without starving, while a production of this size is ongoing. The estimated time for this production would be 3 to 4 years, but people already said that Project Horizons was impossible to do, right? And now look who did it, so with Pony&Wolf, you know we can finish the job. For further information on how to support us, please have a look at the description of this video, as there are also other ways, like our merch store. Sincerely and forever yours, your Pony&Wolf team.